Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. Got you covered. Traditional league, dynasty league, PTR league, IDP league, even daily fantasy football league. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for tuning into the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your Thursday and Sunday host, Grady Duggan, and I hope you guys are all having a fantastic day so far. We have a jam-packed show planned for you guys, and I do not want to waste too much of your time, so let's dive into it. I'm going to be going through position by position and ranking them in tiers, which players land in which tiers, and where are those tiers going to be well drafted, where do they land on the value chart, just so I can help you guys to the best of my ability in preparing for your fantasy football draft. Because let's be honest, NFL players are reporting to training camp within the month, about a little under 3 weeks. Season is right around the corner, and we are going to be drafting for fantasy football before we know it. So there are a lot of different aspects that go into drafting your team, since every league scores a little bit different. But a lot of these players I'm going to be talking about today are going to be solid performers no matter what the league scoring is. I'm not going to get into the bottom half of the league as much as I have in the past. So these are going to be guys that will be productive throughout the season, in my opinion. Then later on in the episode, I am going to touch briefly on the absurd Patrick Mahomes 10-year extension, practically 12 years, because he still had years on his current contract, and for $400 million, if not more, in certain aspects of the deal. We will be talking about that, but that's later in the episode. So let's get to quarterback tiers, one of the most controversial positions in fantasy football, which I have discussed at length in prior episodes. So now I am going to be going through 4 different tiers, 1, 2, 3, and 4, where those areas, those guys should be drafted and why I value them in those sort of rounds, whether it's rounds 1 to 2, 3 to 5, so on and so forth. And then I'm not going to be getting into the bottom half of the NFL quarterbacks or receivers or running backs, but I will, at least for the quarterback position, be putting some kind of placeholder-like players in a tier 5 that you should be shooting higher when you're drafting a starting quarterback. But these are guys maybe in a bye week where someone gets hurt, you can pick them up off the waiver wire, and they will be some placeholder-like quarterbacks. You know, they'll do the job, but you don't want them to be your season long-term quarterback. So we will start with the most obvious fantasy football tier 1, and these are the only 2 guys I would ever use a first-round pick on a quarterback. I am big on waiting to get a quarterback, as I've said in previous episodes, but for the obvious Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson, these are guys that I would draft in the first round if they fall to my spot. Now, there's a difference between fantasy football tiers and just regular tiers. Obviously, tier 1 has 5 or 6, the Russell Wilsons, the Drew Brees, all those guys. But this is a fantasy football podcast, so I'm giving you my tiers for fantasy football drafts. Where would I draft certain players? And this is a strictly tier 1, round 1, and that is Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson, the only 2 guys I would draft in the first round. And I mean, their stats back that up as to why. Patrick Mahomes is thrown for 5,000 and then 5,000 yards in one season and then over 4,000 yards in the next. One of the seasons he had 50 touchdown throws. So his production, it's easy to see why you'd put up a first-round pick for him. He is that good. He has just exploded, and that contract he signed, which we will get into later, shows how good this guy is. Lamar Jackson puts up similar throwing numbers. I mean, he's putting up huge numbers in his first year starting last year. I mean, he threw for over 3,000 yards with 36 touchdown passes, and then on top of that, rushed for over 1,000 yards and 7 touchdowns. So he gets it done in the air and on his feet. So he honestly gives you that quarterback production as well as almost a top running back production. So you just get the best of both worlds with Lamar Jackson. But those are the easiest 2 to decipher of where to rank them and value them in the fantasy football drafts. Obviously, if you're a big believer in waiting for quarterbacks and you want to get a DeAndre Hopkins or a Saquon Barkley in round 1 and wait, I think you'll be just fine. But if you're set on getting a quarterback, in my opinion, those are the only 2 guys that are worth a first-round draft pick. And to be honest, I would put Patrick Mahomes above Lamar Jackson simply because of durability. Now, Lamar Jackson hasn't shown that he's injury-prone or had any issues with things like that in the past. However, him running the ball as much as he does give me a little point of concern simply because he is exposing himself to hits more than other quarterbacks, and if he gets hurt, that messes up your whole team. So I would put Patrick Mahomes ahead of Lamar Jackson in this category, but not by much. They both are extremely valuable and would be great first-round picks. Now, if we're moving on to Tier 2 rounds, I would value these guys around rounds 3 to 5. To be honest, still a little early for me to draft a quarterback, but sometimes these guys start going a little earlier. So I'm going to give you Aaron Rodgers of the Green Bay Packers. Obviously, he's been a fantastic quarterback and fantasy football quarterback in this league for a long time. The thing with him is he doesn't have as many weapons as he usually does. He's got Devontae Adams, but beside that, they didn't add any weapons in the draft. They didn't really change their roster that much. So it does make you kind of question what to do there. People like Russell Wilson and Deshaun Watson are going to be 2 of my favorite quarterbacks to draft this year, simply because of how they can extend plays and are always looking downfield as they're extending the plays and trying to find that open receiver. Russell Wilson is the king of that, and you don't know how many times these guys are adding points to plays that with most quarterbacks would be over a long time ago, but they move with their feet and continue to look downfield and find targets consistently. So Russell Wilson, Deshaun Watson, Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady is another one. I'm a little wary on Tom Brady. He is getting up there in age. I don't think he had as good of a year in New England last year. He kind of regressed a little bit. However, their offense as a whole was just not that good. They didn't have much of a pass game. They didn't have a lot of weapons around him. Sony Michel had a nice year, but it was just a little different on the Patriots offense. So give him a little benefit of the doubt. He's going to one of the most talented receiving corps in Tampa Bay. And then he obviously gets to team up with his favorite target in Rob Gronkowski again, who came out of retirement. And another reason that Tom Brady is up here again in these rankings, rounds 3 to 5, is also because the offense he's going in. We have these weapons, but Bruce Arians loves to throw the ball, and he loves to throw the ball deep. So expect him to benefit off of Tom Brady coming in and being able to perform. Now, another quarterback that might surprise you that I'm going to put in here, and my last two quarterbacks, one of them is Drew Brees. He's obvious. He produces year in and year out. He has Michael Thomas, Alvin Kamara. He's got guys all around him. Drew Brees is a no surprise there. But someone who is going to shock some people a little bit is Matthew Stafford. He was having an MVP season at the end of last season before getting injured and sitting out the last half. But if you look at his stats, he was going off, and that offense loves to throw the ball. He has reliable receivers in Kenny Golladay and Marvin Jones, as well as Danny Amendola. So I would expect that offense to do extremely good things this year. I think DeAndre Swift, the rookie, will also really help in the run game as well, be a nice complement to Kerryon Johnson. So I think that offense is going to improve as a whole. Even though they were already putting up points last year, they were productive. Matthew Stafford was having a great year. So that's why I put him in that next little range of people, of quarterbacks to be exact, because he is a big-time performer. I think he's going to, again, look very, very nice. And he's one, sure, they might not win every game, but his fantasy points are going to be up there. They're playing a competitive division, which means they're not just going to be running the clock out in the fourth quarter. They're going to need to be passing the ball, getting it down the field. And that's why I think Matthew Stafford is a good fit there. So you got Aaron Rodgers, Drew Brees, Russell Wilson, Deshaun Watson, Stafford, and Tom Brady. Now, moving on to tier 3, where you get to a little bit of the younger guys. Not completely. There's still some veterans in here. Now, these are somewhat people I have rated around maybe the 7 to 10 range. You could probably even get them a little later because, as you know, people like to wait in the fantasy football drafts to draft their quarterbacks. So 3 to 5 might even be high for those last guys I talked about, but now we're going to the later rounds. You could even get these guys later, but just to be safe, if you want a quarterback production, you want that consistent week in and week out, fairly good production, these are the guys that I would go with. 1, Josh Allen. Some might say, why Josh Allen? Haven't had that much success. He had a good year last year. He's got a lot of weapons around him. Cole Beasley played well. Now he's got Stephon Diggs. Devin Singletary was really good with him. They got a rookie in Zach Moss, who I think is going to complement the run game nice. And that offense has just been consistently improving. So Josh Allen is a big one. He also is pretty good on his feet. He's better than most people think. He can run a little bit, which is big for someone like that. He's got one of the biggest arms in the NFL, and then he can move around in the pocket and scramble a little bit. So expect him to do big things. Another one is the Eagles quarterback, Carson Wentz. If he can stay healthy, he can be a top 12 quarterback in my opinion, but he just has trouble staying on the field. He also doesn't have the best receiving core. They drafted Jalen Reagor out of TCU in the first round this year, so they're hoping that can be their kind of big speed vertical threat and number one receiver. And that's an offense that needs a vertical threat. They love throwing the ball down the field. They've shown that in the past. Dak Prescott is another guy who really, his name's been in the news a lot recently simply because of Patrick Mahomes' contract. And now they're like, oh, well, where's Dak's contract? Should have been done a long time ago. But he's someone who I think is going to benefit from the Mike McCarthy hire, new offense, new head coach. I think a little better than Jason Garrett. And he has good receiving core, just a good all-around balanced offense that I think is going to perform at a high level all year. This next guy is someone I'm actually shockingly high on. People were high on him last year, and then he completely disappointed after a promising rookie season, and that's Baker Mayfield of the Cleveland Browns. And I think he's going to finally have to put his money where his mouth is and start performing. He's been a little quieter this offseason. I think Kevin Stefanski, the new head coach, old offensive coordinator of the Minnesota Vikings, is going to be a great fit for that offense. Baker Mayfield is best in a play action pass offense, and that is exactly what Kevin Stefanski runs. So with Odell Beckham Jr., Jarvis Landry, Austin Hooper, you name it, they have a handful of weapons. David Njoku, if he doesn't get traded, Nick Chubb in the backfield, that team's going to be just fine. So Baker Mayfield is another big-time quarterback, I think, poised to have a big year. And now, making it to the two vets of this tier 3. That's Big Ben and Phillip Rivers. Phillip Rivers, now an Indianapolis Colt. I think that's going to be a great fit for him. They have a good offense, a lot of young guys with the best offensive line in the league. And then Big Ben is just Big Ben. He's back, he's healthy. If you look at the Steelers' production 2 years ago when he was still the quarterback before getting hurt last year, Juju Smith-Schuster had a fantastic year. James Conner had a fantastic year. So expect that offense as a whole to perform again. And, Big Ben, I'm not expecting some big numbers week in and week out, but I would expect him to be able to perform at least consistently and get you a solid 15, maybe 20 points every week. And out of a quarterback position, that's all you need because your running backs and receivers are really going to be who's the ones putting up the points. So that is the tier 3, round 7 to 10, maybe that range for those type of guys. Now, as we move forward to the tier 4, rounds, maybe 11 to 15, you can get these guys pretty late. They're not going to be people's first quarterbacks. And these are guys that honestly have a lot of upside. They could be big time performers and completely perform well outside their drafting value, but they're down here just because they're a little less proven. Maybe their offense is a little questionable. Just certain different aspects of where they're at in their career put them in this tier. But the first guy I'm going to go with is Jimmy Garoppolo of the 49ers. And first year starting completely healthy after his torn ACL and takes the team to the Super Bowl. You can only expect him to get better. He's in Kyle Shanahan's offense, one of the best offensive coordinators in the game right now. With George Kittle, you got you don't have Emmanuel Sanders anymore. Brandon Ayuk, the rookie, Deebo Samuel. You have all sorts of weapons. So I would say Raheem Mostert, but Raheem Mostert just requested a trade, so that's a little interesting thing to monitor with that running game. So Jimmy G might have some more pressure put on his shoulders, have to elevate that pass game to another level. This next guy, honestly, had a huge season last year. Your rookie of the year, Kyler Murray, honestly has the potential to have a breakout year this year, put up MVP numbers. It's just going to depend on what he does. He really fits Cliff Kingsbury's offense. Now he has DeAndre Hopkins and Larry Fitzgerald, along with Christian Kirk and Andy Isabella. So he's got a receiving core that can produce around him. It's just a matter of putting everything together. He's another quarterback, not to the standard of Lamar Jackson, but he has the ability to run like Lamar Jackson. He is mobile and can really kill a defense on his feet. Now, this next quarterback is someone I'm high on, new starter for the Carolina Panthers, Teddy Bridgewater. And he has a new offensive coordinator who's a new head coach in the NFL, Matt Rule from Baylor. And one thing, Teddy Bridgewater has just shown he's a winner in the league. When he started in Minnesota, he took him to the playoffs, got hurt, went to New Orleans, kind of resurrected his career, and really performed well there when Drew Brees went down for a couple weeks and showed he could start in this league. Now he goes to an offensive-minded coach with really, I think, could be a pretty good offense. Obviously, you've got Christian McCaffrey out of the backfield, so expect Teddy Bridgewater. He's not going to blow you out of the water every week, but he could perform and give you solid numbers. Now, this next guy is someone I am particularly high on. The question around him is his receivers, but Drew Lock, Denver Broncos quarterback, I think he could really have a good year, and he showed that in the last couple games when he finally got his opportunity to start last year. He showed he could be a good, productive quarterback in this league. Now it's just a matter of him putting that together for a 17-game season. Can he do that? We will have to see. Then you have Jared Goff, someone who kind of had one breakout year, got his money, and hasn't performed up to that standard after the Super Bowl loss to the Patriots a couple years back. So that's an interesting situation to monitor. He obviously has Sean McVay, who's a great offensive-minded coach, and will put him in position to succeed, but that offense is just not what it was at one point. So he's someone kind of lower on the list of this tier, but someone who could potentially give you solid numbers every week. So there's also, as we go into tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, these are guys that you draft. You want to start every week. Those are your guys. But you got to think of injuries and you got to think of buys. So to end out this part of the show, I wanted to give some kind of placeholders, some people who you can pick up off the waiver wire and they could just do the job for 1 or 2 weeks if need be. So it's Ryan Fitzpatrick, of the Miami Dolphins. Who knows if he'll be the full-time starter with Tua Tagovailoa coming in now. So that's another position battle to monitor. Joe Burrow, the number 1 overall draft pick. I'm not as high as on him as some people are just because of that offense he's going into. It's really not a great offense. Dwayne Haskins is another one for the Washington football team. Who knows what their name will be going into the season, but that is a team to monitor. That'll be an interesting one. Ron Rivera is a great coach, so I think he'll put him in good spots. And last but not least, the final one is Daniel Jones. Now, Daniel Jones is a funny one to predict because he's not going to do anything crazy. He's just your generic quarterback pocket passer who's going to go down there and he's going to make a lot of smart decisions, not going to put the ball into too much of a harm's way. So those are my placeholders. If you need someone on a bye, need someone after an injury, those are some guys to look for. I hope that gave you some insight as to what to look for or who to look for as you draft one of the more controversial positions in fantasy football. Stick around after the break. We're going to be going through tiers for the running backs.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back, everybody, to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. We just went over the tiers of quarterbacks, where I rank and value quarterbacks around the NFL. And now we're going to be doing something similar, but this is going to be for running backs, a position that is much more constant in fantasy football and something that you need more than one. You need a couple, whether it's 2, 3 good running backs that can be putting up numbers for you. I am a big believer on drafting running backs early, simply because there are less of them than receivers. There are less productive running backs. If you can get some good production out of your running backs, it is a good thing for your team. So let's just get right into it. Tier 1, the elite of the elite. Now let me say, pretty much all of these guys will be going in the first round. You will be beyond lucky to be able to get one of these guys in the second or third round. And if you do, you might want to check who you're playing fantasy football with, because you should have that league in the bag, let's be honest. But so for tier 1, Christian McCaffrey, ever since he's been in this league, he has completely torn it up. He's a huge threat out of the backfield, whether it's the passing game or the running game. And I think in a kind of new air raid college-like offense for Matt Rule, he is going to be Teddy Bridgewater's security blanket. He's dependable, he's reliable, he's just an all-around back that you really can't go wrong with. We're going to go over to Dallas Cowboys running back Ezekiel Elliott, another consistent runner, hard pound-the-nose running back who can also beat you with ridiculous speed and really be that big-time pounder for Mike McCarthy and the Dallas Cowboys. We're going to go Saquon Barkley of the New York Giants. He's really going to be the focal point of that offense, which will help his fantasy football production. He had a little leg and ankle injury last year, which hurt him a bit, but that is about the only injury history he has. So I would expect him to have a great season, especially in a fairly improved offense around him. Then we're going to go over to the NFC South with Alvin Kamara. This one, I have a little bit more question marks than I do about the first three with Alvin Kamara, simply because he's a little more nimble. Can he be that number one back for 3 downs? That's what I question every year with him. There's no doubt he is electric when he has the ball in his hands, whether it's out of the backfield or running the ball. He's a threat to take it the distance every time, but it's something to pay attention to, being a little bit of a smaller running back. Now, Dalvin Cook and Nick Chubb are my next two. Cook from the Minnesota Vikings has been a huge part of their offense, and really some of these guys with Christian McCaffrey, especially Alvin Kamara and Dalvin Cook, they're such big threats in the pass game too. If you're in a PPR league, those 3 guys are huge, and getting that production out of your running back in a PPR league, it is just undeniable how huge that can be. So Dalvin Cook is another big name to look out for. And then Nick Chubb of the Browns, he showed what he can do last season, really kind of carrying that offense at a time when Baker Mayfield and the rest of them were struggling. So that is my tier 1 elite of the elite. These players are going to be going in the first round. There's no question about it. So it's just going to have to line up with your draft pick for getting these guys. And I go running back over receiver in the first round. That's just preference because there's less of them that can produce like these guys, but you can't go wrong. We'll go into receivers later in the show. Now, if we go over to tier 2, these are near elites. These are other still in the running back 1 conversation. You really can't go wrong with these guys either. I'm going to start it off. Some people might have this guy ranked a little bit lower than I do, but I am a big Josh Jacobs fan of the Las Vegas Raiders. And the reason is, this guy is a absolute bell cow of a running back, 3-down back. He does his job. He was huge for the Raiders offense last year, which is only going to continue to get better under John Gruden. They're a complete pound the ball, run first offense, which is good for Josh Jacobs. And this is a running back who just rushed under 1,000 yards. And if he didn't miss the last maybe 4 to 6 games in the NFL season, he probably was going to be 1, well over 1,000 yards rushing, and 2, the NFL Rookie of the Year. But Kyler Murray took that one instead. Now moving down the line, I'm going to go Derrick Henry of the Tennessee Titans. I have a little bit of worry about him just because you saw how much they used him in the playoffs, and it makes you wonder, can he really do that for 17 games? But the fact of the matter is he's going to be their number 1 guy. He's going to be the heart of their offense, and they're going to need him to perform. Continuing to move down the list, I have Miles Sanders of the Philadelphia Eagles. Has the potential to be a top 10 performer in fantasy football coming up this year. I think that could be a steal in the 2nd or 3rd round. I think some people aren't going to be as high as him as I am. So that's a name to look out for. Now, this next name is someone who people are going to question why I am so high on him, but in his time as the lone star running back last season, Austin Eckler really showed out for the Los Angeles Chargers, and he's another guy who is a huge threat in the passing game, which gives a running back a completely different dynamic and really puts them apart from the other running backs. Joe Mixon's another name you can throw into this list. Near elite running backs. The only thing with Joe Mixon is I just don't trust that offense around him. It kind of scares me if we're being honest. But that is a good list. Tier 2, Tier 1, those are all guys. First tier, complete first rounders. Tier 2, 2nd to 3rd rounders, if not all 2nd. They're going to be off the board quick. You're going to have to get these guys early. So now I'm going to go into Tier 3. This is kind of a high risk, high reward tier group of guys. The first one is going to be Chris Carson of the Seattle Seahawks. He had some issues with handling the ball at the end of last season, but with Rashad Penny injured or kind of looking questionable, who knows where he's going to be at, I think Chris Carson really could be a huge fantasy football asset for teams. He's going to be that number one guy in that offense. That offense is always going to be functioning at a high functionality with Russell Wilson. So that is one to look out for. Now, another one used to be one of the biggest stars in the NFL, a new Denver Bronco, Melvin Gordon. That is another interesting concept to see. He hasn't played much because he held out for the first half of 2019 season. So Melvin Gordon in a new offense, I think he and Phillip Lindsay have an opportunity to really be an electric duo out of the backfield. Phillip Lindsay more of a scat back kind of in the passing game. So look for him to have a big year in Melvin Gordon. Mark Ingram is another interesting case, kind of sharing the carries in Baltimore, but he is always putting up numbers, and especially in that offense, Lamar Jackson has it churning at all times. So you can't really go wrong with Mark Ingram. These are all guys, I would say, in between 4 to 6 rounds, between those 2 rounds, 4 and 6, I would be looking at these couple of players. Another one is Aaron Jones of the Green Bay Packers. That has been an offense that didn't add too many weapons. Aaron Rodgers needs his running game, and I think Matt LaFleur is going to completely depend on Aaron Jones to pick up the pace and be that big guy. Now, high risk, high reward. This guy is the definition of it. Someone I am excited to see in his first year. And rookies are always a little risky, but I have said in previous episodes how high I am on this guy. I think Jonathan Taylor could be the NFL Rookie of the Year when the 2020 season comes to an end. This is someone at Wisconsin who put up huge numbers for 3 or 4 years, was a Heisman runner-up, and now he goes into Indianapolis. I'm sorry. Whew. He goes into, that's how excited I am about this guy. He is a big-time ball player. He goes into Indianapolis behind one of the best offensive lines in the NFL and has an opportunity to really showcase what he's about. So that is another name to look out for. High risk, high reward in Jonathan Taylor. And then Leonard Fournette to round out tier 3. I'm not so high on him as some people are, but he's shown the type of running back he can be in this league. Drafting someone from Jacksonville kind of scares me a little bit just with Gardner Minshew under helm. Who knows where that offense is going to be, but he might take a big step, and that will help the Jacksonville Jaguars really regain that momentum that they had 2 to 3 years ago. So Leonard Fournette is a name to listen for. Now we're going to tier 4, kind of heading into the running back 2 range, out of the running back 1 range. Still solid producers. Could be a running back 2, could even be a flex if you get good enough receivers. It just depends on where your roster is at. But we are going to go first 2. Used to be teammates is James Conner and Le'Veon Bell. James Conner finally gets Ben Roethlisberger back. That offense will be a huge production machine now that they have a healthy quarterback and not Mason Rudolph or Devin Hodges. And with Le'Veon Bell, he's another runner that can get the ball out of the backfield in the passing game as well. The Jets are going to need him to do something when they don't have as much in the passing game. So Sam Darnold and Adam Gase will be leaning on Le'Veon Bell. Now, this other name, my second rookie of this list, someone I'm excited about, and I think he will take over the backfield in Detroit quickly, is DeAndre Swift, second-round pick out of Georgia. I don't think the Lions are as high on Kerryon Johnson as they once were. He didn't have a good year last year, kind of got banged up. So they need someone, a little scat back, quick pounder guy, and I think DeAndre Swift is going to be that new guy. Now, I'm going to go over to David Johnson, first-year Houston Texan, and Bill O'Brien is going to need him to really take over that running game. They haven't had a consistent runner in a while, and they had Carlos Hyde, but wasn't as big of a runner as David Johnson is. And this is another guy that they traded DeAndre Hopkins, so the offense is going to need to be picked up somewhere else. They still have Will Fuller and some talented receivers, but Deshaun Watson is going to need a running game to get those receivers going. So David Johnson is a big name to watch out for. Now, here's another name I was big on going into last season. You could probably pick him up a little bit later, a little bit of a sleeper here in David Montgomery for the Chicago Bears. This is someone who every time he got the opportunity, he did extremely well last year. But for some reason, Matt Nagy and the offense did not want to shy away from their other runners. And he was a big-time loser of the running back by committee concept in fantasy football. So as long as they stay to their guns, stay true to their guns, and just live with David Montgomery, I think Nick Foles is going to have a much better time than Mitchell Trubisky did last year. Not only just a more consistent passer, but he's going to be able to keep that offense on the field, and I think David Montgomery will be a huge beneficiary to that. And now, as we move our way to the running back 3 to 4 conversation, this is going to be the last tier I go over, simply because I'm not going to get into the bottom guys. These are people that can be consistent bye week or injury guys that you pick up off the waiver wire or even draft. These great flex options in my eyes, some of these guys I'm about to name. And some people you can depend on in the flex, but you don't want them to be your top running backs or the first running backs you draft. You want to have maybe 2 running backs already on the roster when you pick these guys up. Now, I'm going to go to first guy, Devin Singletary of the Buffalo Bills. He was a rookie last year and was kind of the number 2 guy in Buffalo behind Frank Gore. He can help out of the passing game as well, and really had a nice rookie season, showed he can play in this league, and kind of showed how he can be a huge fit in this young and improving Bills offense. I think this Bills team is only going to get better, and Frank Gore is out, which means Devin Singletary is going to take over the bulk of the carries. So a huge upgrade in Devin Singletary. That offense was much better than people thought last year with Josh Allen slinging the rock. Now they have Stephon Diggs. So expect Devin Singletary to take over the bulk of the carries and really run with those. Now, the next guy I'm going to talk about, we talked about the first stringer on this team in Melvin Gordon, and now we go over to Phillip Lindsay of the Denver Broncos, someone who I've been high on since he came out of Boulder a couple years ago, Colorado Boulder, now with the Denver Broncos. This is another running back who can get you a lot of value out of the passing game in the backfield, which is huge in fantasy football. It just adds on to their value simply because they're getting more than just running back touches. They're getting passing game touches, which is huge opportunity for running backs. So Phillip Lindsay, I think, yes, Melvin Gordon is going to take away some of his carries, but he's a good third down back. He's a red zone threat too, because he's not your typical stereotypical pounded in running back. Our defenses are going to have to plan for when he's on the field in the red zone. So that is one to watch out for. Now, this third guy I'm going to be talking about, it's his first year on his new team. He was just traded over from San Francisco, and he had a nice career with the 49ers, and that is Matt Breida of the Miami Dolphins. Kind of a different offense. It's going to be interesting to see what he does outside of Kyle Shanahan's system, but I think he could be a great addition to that Miami Dolphins offense. Yes, they have Kenyon Drake, who I could have talked about a little earlier, but I just don't see them having huge value drafting a running back out of that offense early on. Matt Breida is a guy you can plug and play off the waiver wire or later in the rounds and expect him to be a solid flex for your team, or maybe your guy's on a bye and you have him on your bench and you have him as that security blanket. So something to look out for. Another one we talked about his other counterpart before. I'm going to go back to the Detroit Lions, and that's Kerryon Johnson. He's been up and down in his NFL career. He has some really good weeks, and then he has some weeks where he really struggles to find the holes. And now this is an offensive line that has been improving the past 2 years, and it will continue to improve this year. So that will help Kerryon Johnson get back to where they think he can. But I expect DeAndre Swift to take a big chunk of his carries, unfortunately, if you are a Kerryon Johnson fan. So that is one thing to consider when drafting Kerryon Johnson, but that's another guy similar to Matt Breida. Really, all these guys I'm talking about in my running back 3 to 4s, they could be a solid flex, or if someone gets hurt for a week or, sick with the coronavirus going on, it's something that you have to pay attention to and you need depth. So these are the guys that you need to be aware of and know how they're doing or what they're doing, and that they could be available, because you could need people like this. And in this type of NFL season that they're going into, I mean, heck, anything is possible. It could be a great chance that these guys at one point are the number one running back on a team and are starting to get the bulk of the carries for a period of time with everything going on. Now, an interesting tidbit I want to get to with the running back position. This is someone I would have put probably in tier 3, high risk, high reward. He showed how valuable he could be in the end of the season last year for the San Francisco 49ers, and that's Raheem Mostert. I expected him to have a huge year for the Niners this coming year. Really excited to see what he could do, not just as a special teamer, but now coming into the season as the number one running back for Kyle Shanahan and the San Francisco 49ers. But a big but on this one, Raheem Mostert, breaking news. This podcast is going to be airing Thursday, July 9th. So, as in yesterday, on July 8th, breaking news coming from Adam Schefter, Ian Rappaport, a whole handful of NFL reporters, that Raheem Mostert has requested a trade out of San Francisco. So, a lot of different things to unpack here. And to be honest, I'm surprised by this. So, he wanted more money because he performed. I mean, he was the best player on that offense last season going into the Super Bowl, so it's understandable. But Kyle Shanahan has never been one to overpay a running back. He's someone who scheme fits all types of running backs and really has them get career years. I mean, Alfred Morris, his rookie season almost was a 2,000-yard rusher. And I mean, overall, after a couple of years, he had 4,000 yards. So I think Kyle Shanahan does not want to pay running backs big numbers because he can get production out of other guys. So Raheem Mostert, I would have put him in the high risk, high reward category because he could have been huge in that offense. But now requesting a trade, I'm not too sure. This is a guy who was a career special teamser. He'd been on 5 to 6 different teams, cut from different teams, and really Kyle Shanahan finally learned how to use his skill set. And he was huge for the 49ers in the 2019 season. And a big reason they had that success. But requesting a trade is an interesting move because who knows how other teams are going to value him and use him if he's going to be able to get to that production. So I wanted to throw that in there because if Raheem Mostert is on the 49ers, high pick, high risk, high reward kind of thing, because you never know how many running back Kyle Shanahan is going to be using, but he could stick with him and he could be a top performer in fantasy football. But if he's on another team, it's just a questionable pick. Did he find his groove and now he's really going to break into the NFL? Or is he going to show how much of a system fit he was for Kyle Shanahan and the 49ers and struggle elsewhere? So that's my take on that. That's my take on all the running backs. I hope I've been giving you some good information as we inch closer to the NFL season. So please stick around after the break. I'm going to be going in depth about the receiver position, probably talk about a little bit of the tight end position as well, but mainly the receiver position in this next segment. So stick around after the break. Let's get to it.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back, everybody, to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. It's your host, Grady Duggan, and I have recently gone over my quarterback tiers as well as my tiers for running backs. Little different type of tiers just because the positions are so different with certain rankings and values. And running backs are an interesting one because you want to try and grab them early. But now we're going to look at receivers, and the thing that makes the receiving position so unique is there is such a volume of receivers. I mean, each team has 3 to 5 guys who can produce at any given moment for fantasy football. So it's a little challenging to figure out where to draft who. So I'm going to give you my receiver tiers, and these are just where I like guys. Obviously, I'm sure there's going to be people who are thinking, oh, you missed a bunch of people because you didn't talk about certain guys. There's certain teams have receiver 2 or receiver 3 guys that I will miss out on, but this is my receiver list that is helping me prepare for my fantasy football drafts. So let's get right off the bat. Tier 1, these are going to be guys who you can get in the first or second round. Majority of them are the first round, but because running back is such a big position in fantasy football, some of these guys are going to fall into the second round. They won't get far, but they will fall into the second round. So the top receiver for my fantasy football drafts is Michael Thomas of the New Orleans Saints. I mean, this guy catches absolutely everything, especially in a PPR league. This guy, it seems like, has 6 to 8 receptions in every single game, if not more, and his receiving yards is always up there. He's Drew Brees' reliable main target, and I don't think that is going anywhere. Julio Jones is the next guy out of the Atlanta Falcons. He's been Matt Ryan's number 1 target for years, a top receiver in this league. Julio Jones is someone who is just going to be one of the most consistent players in the NFL. Moving right along to Davante Adams. You can't go wrong with Aaron Rodgers tossing you the rock. And Davante Adams really is that number 1 guy in that offense. The Packers, as I've said before, did not do much to improve their offense. So if Aaron Rodgers wants to make a push for the playoffs again, it's going to have to be with Davante Adams as his number 1 man. And speaking of playoffs, we're going to the Super Bowl champs in Tyreek Hill. This guy is one of, if not the fastest player in the NFL, and he has the best and, let's say, most paid quarterback throwing him the ball in Patrick Mahomes. Tyreek Hill is just a big play threat, someone you cannot go wrong with. So those are my main tier 1 guys, round 1 guys. One guy who is still tier 1, but I personally would not draft him in the first round is DeAndre Hopkins, a newly Arizona Cardinal. And my reason for that is there's just a little bit more of uncertainty going into this season with him being an Arizona Cardinal now. I mean, I think Kyler Murray is going to be great, and that will be good for DeAndre Hopkins, and it is a very pass-heavy offense. I mean, it's pretty much an air raid that Cliff Kingsbury is running over there, so you can't go wrong with DeAndre Hopkins. He's going to be good, but that is one person I would wait for the second round personally. Now, we head on over to tier 2, and this is still second round guys, probably going into the third and maybe even fourth round, all elite receivers still. So you can't go wrong with these guys, but I'm going to start it off is Kenny Golladay of the Detroit Lions. I've said it before, I'm high on the Detroit Lions, or higher than most. I don't expect them to be competing for the Super Bowl this year or anything, but I think that offense can produce fantasy football numbers. Kenny Golladay and Matthew Stafford were great last year, so remember that duo. Then we're going to go over to Tampa Bay with Chris Goodwin and Mike Evans. I mean, they were both already productive in their past couple of years with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and now you get Tom Brady and Rob Gronkowski a part of the offense. I mean, that offense just got much more valuable in the fantasy football world. So expect Chris Goodwin and Mike Evans to really take a big jump. And now, moving forward, I'm going to go with Odell Beckham Jr. This guy used to be at the top of the list, used to be that number 1 guy, but he kind of had a falling off year. Baker Mayfield didn't do as well, but I expect that to change this year. So watch out for Odell. I think Kevin Stefanski's offense in Cleveland is going to be much more spread around for everyone, so I don't think it's going to be some huge Odell show, but he's going to be consistent. He's going to get back closer to what we're used to seeing. And to round out the tier 2, I'm going Adam Thielen out of the Minnesota Vikings. This is a guy who now, with Stephon Diggs out, it is his show to run with Kirk Cousins and Dalvin Cook. They're going to need him to step up and be that reliable number one target that he's shown he can be. So I expect him. He didn't have as good of a year than last year, so I expect him to have a bit of a bounce back year going into the 2020 season. So that's my tier 2, guys. Those are everyone I've listed is a round 1 to 3, maybe 4 if you're lucky. But now as we get into these later guys, I'm going 4 to 6 or 7, depending on where your league values them. Again, a lot of this is going to be where guys you are playing against are drafting these people. So it really just depends. Every league is different, but it's something to be aware of and pay attention to. So as we get into tier 3, I'm going Calvin Ridley of the Atlanta Falcons. I think he could be a breakout guy for Matt Ryan and Julio Jones. I mean, the defenses are already going to be keying on Julio heavily like they have been every year. So expect Calvin Ridley to be a breakout star and really show that he could be a number 1 receiver in this league. Then we're going to go over to the Dallas Cowboys with Amari Cooper. And this is a guy who, I mean, you can't really go wrong. He showed what he can do with a reliable quarterback and offense. And I think the offense is only going to take a big jump under Mike McCarthy. So Amari Cooper is another big name to watch out for. Now, this next name had a huge 2018 season and then fell off a little bit with quarterback production in the 2019 season, and that is Juju Smith-Schuster for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Big Ben is back. I think that is going to boost his fantasy football production and really help him in the long run for the 2020 season. That whole team in general, not just Juju Smith-Schuster, but I think we're going to see Juju Smith-Schuster get back to that 2018 mode. Now, this is an interesting one as we move forward in the tier 3. I'm going Keenan Allen of the Los Angeles Chargers. First year without Phillip Rivers. I'm not quite sure if it's going to be Tyrod Taylor or Justin Herbert, but it's still the number 1 guy in that offense, especially without Melvin Gordon. Now they're going to need Keenan Allen to stay healthy, which has been an issue for him. So that's a name to watch out for, but that is one I would be a little bit more cautious with just because of his injury. To round out tier 3, 2 guys I'm pretty high on are a little bit younger, a little more of a sleeper in this range. They're not going to be sleepers, but if we're going this high, people are not going to be expecting them to be this high, and that's DJ Moore of the Carolina Panthers and Deebo Samuel of the San Francisco 49ers. Now, Deebo Samuel is someone I am huge on. He showed once Emmanuel Sanders came to the 49ers in 2019 and there was a second guy there, Deebo Samuel showed how dangerous he could be in Kyle Shanahan's offense. And I've stressed it enough. I'm sure you hear it all over the media. I mean, Deebo Samuel and the 49ers are going to be good. Kyle Shanahan knows how to scheme open his receivers, and Deebo Samuel is a monster when he has the ball in his hands after the catch. He's a yak monster, yards after catch. So that is a name to keep an eye out for. Kind of in like the 5th to 7th round, you could kind of get a little bit of a steal because I don't think people are going to be drafting him that high, but I think he will play to that value. So those were my first tier 3 guys, my top 3 tiers, the big names. No one's going to shock you here. These are all guys you expect to draft and be consistent. Your wide receiver 1s mainly, some are 2s, but people who are going to be able to produce for you week in and week out. These are guys who are going to be getting 5 to 8 receptions each game, hopefully at least 10 targets depending on, every game is different, but those are guys who you are going to be looking for to put up big numbers week in and week out and be those constant performers for you. Now, as we get into tier 4, these are some wide receiver 2s that still have the potential to do exactly what tier 3 guys I think will do, but a little bit less reliable in a way. There's more going on in their offense, or just they're not as that top guy, or it's just not as talented as some of these other guys are in their offense wise. So as we move forward, I'm going to go with Allen Robinson in Tier 4 as my number one guy. Chicago Bears wideout. One thing that I think will benefit him is Nick Foles being the starting quarterback now. I know they say it might be an open competition just because Mitchell Trubisky was that number 2 overall pick a few years ago, but let's be honest, he hasn't panned out, and I expect Matt Nagy to be in a bit of win-now mode, coaching for his job. So I think a veteran is going to be big for the Chicago Bears, and Allen Robinson will probably be the beneficiary of that, take a little boost in his fantasy football and football production. And now Tier 4, this guy, second guy, could be someone who I said earlier, but a new offense, which I'm high on. I like the Buffalo Bills offense, but who knows exactly what's going to go on, how he's going to fit. And that's Stephon Diggs being traded from the Minnesota Vikings to the Buffalo Bills. I think he has a chance to really break out. He's a deep threat, and Josh Allen has one of the biggest arms in the NFL, so he could be a perfect fit. But unless you're DeAndre Hopkins and the Cardinals, a new team, I got to be a little eerie about. So Stephon Diggs, I'd expect him to be great, but something to watch out for. Now, T.Y. Hilton is a guy who I have liked throughout his career. He dropped off a little bit when Andrew Luck retired, but he's someone who he's not going to blow you away every single week with his production, but he's going to be right there, pounding points away. Just a consistent wide receiver, a great just wide receiver 2, maybe 1 some weeks, but he's going to be big in that number 2 position. And now as you move forward, we talked about Odell Beckham Jr. earlier in the show. We're going to go with his best friend and teammate who lines up right across in Jarvis Landry. And this is someone who I had last year, and it took him a little bit to get going, but once he does, he is a reception machine. So if you're in a PPR league, Jarvis Landry is someone you want on your team. He's not a huge yards after the catch guy. He doesn't necessarily find the end zone ridiculously often, but he's going to get those targets and he's going to come down with them a lot of the time. He is a reliable receiver and someone who could be a good wide receiver 2 to 3 in the fantasy football world. So that's a name to look out for. Then as we move forward, there's a little bit of a riskier pick, and that's Tennessee Titans second-year receiver A.J. Brown. He showed he could be a very productive receiver last year with Ryan Tannehill once he took over. So I expect A.J. Brown to be good. I'm just a little scared of the Tennessee Titans offense. I think they're going to be run heavy with Derrick Henry, but he's such a focal point that they need A.J. Brown to step up because they can't expect Derrick Henry to run the ball 30 or 40 times like they did at the end of the season. So watch out for A.J. Brown. That's a big one that he could. It's kind of a high risk, high reward, like I talked about in the running back position. So that's one to keep an eye out for. Pay attention. He could be very good, but he also could have some games where Derrick Henry does take over and the passing game is kind of non-existent. So it's a good guy to have, but someone you need to know what you're getting. Now, as we move over into Tier 5, one of my favorite receivers in NFL, he is playing on the Detroit Lions, and that's Marvin Jones. He's someone who is just a consistent receiver going into the 2020 season. He is kind of a big red zone target for the Detroit Lions, and I'd expect that to carry on. This is a pass-first offense, so I really think that the receivers in Kenny Galladay and Marvin Jones will see huge fantasy football production in the 2020 season. And now as we move forward, Tier 5 into Tier 5, more deeper in, the number 2 guy is Cooper Kupp. You know, I go back and forth with Cooper Kupp, but the fact of the matter is he's going to be that Rams number 1 guy. Sean McVay likes to get Jared Goff rolling out of the pocket in play action and find a very reliable slot receiver in Cooper Kupp, arguably one of the best. Some people are going to have Cooper Kupp much higher because of how many targets and receptions he's going to rack up. But I'm a little lower on him just because I'm a little questionable about the Rams offense, but he's someone who's going to produce for you week in, week out. There's no argument about that. I hope you guys are getting some good information out of these wide receivers. I know it's a lot of names to jot down or think about, kind of name after name, but that's what fantasy football is. That's what it's all about. You got to know the depth chart on these teams, and you got to know who is going to be getting what type of action in these offenses. That's why I'm going to take it over to Courtland Sutton of the Denver Broncos. He really had a good year last year, and now that Drew Lock is going to have his first full season as an NFL starter, he's going to need that security blanket and that number one guy. So I would not be surprised if Courtland Sutton has a huge season this year. Now, to round out my tier 5, someone who in past years has been much, much higher. He didn't play last year. A little sketched out about his offense. I've said that this episode. I've said that in previous episodes, and that's AJ Green of the Cincinnati Bengals. Really been a top receiver in this league for a long time, and I'm sure he's going to have weeks where he produces, but that offense and that team in general, I don't think is going to be that good. So in a way, that's going to benefit him because they're going to be passing the ball a lot, and he's going to need to perform. But rookie quarterback, there's just a lot of things. Their team's not great, so it's something that I wouldn't waste too high of a draft pick on. But if he's sitting there in the 7th to 9th round, you can't go wrong with AJ Green at that value, let's be honest. So it's just one where it could be a good pick, but you got to know where you're picking him. Now, as we head into tier 6, similar to tier 5, these are guys who are going to have big games here and there. And maybe 10 games, they have big games. But they can't, you're not going to expect them to be that wide receiver 1 type of production. But these guys are going to be a solid wide receiver 3, maybe a little higher at times. But you just got to know what to draft and where to draft and what you're drafting. I'm going to start with Michael Gallup, the Dallas Cowboys. It's a crowded receiving core with Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb. So Dak Prescott is going to be sharing the ball around, and Michael Gallup is going to get the ball a lot. But because he has so many weapons with Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb, like I said, they've also got Ezekiel Elliott. It's going to be only so many targets going to Michael Gallup. So it's someone who could be a good wide receiver 3, maybe a flex position guy, but you got to know where you're drafting him just because of the type of action he's going to get. Now, second guy, this is someone I am big on, and behind Jonathan Taylor, he is probably my favorite for NFL Rookie of the Year, and that's Brandon Ayuk, rookie from Arizona State out of the San Francisco 49ers. And one of the main reasons I've said it over and over again about the Niners is Kyle Shanahan. He knows how to scheme up his offense. He knows what receivers he wants, and he knows how to use them. He gets players open, which is huge for receivers. And this is another guy, not only does he have crazy good speed, but he also is a beast with the ball after the catch. He's similar to Deebo Samuel, where they kind of run like a running back. So I expect Brandon Ayuk to have a huge rookie season and be a nice complement to Deebo Samuel and that Niners offense. Now I'm going to talk about Will Fuller of the Houston Texans. And Will Fuller is an interesting case when it comes to fantasy football and really just football in general, because he has all the talent in the world. And I'm serious, literally all the talent in the world. One of the more talented receivers in this league. But I don't think he's played a full season since he was in the NFL. He finds a way to get hurt every single year. And it's not his fault, of course not. But I'm just saying, you got to know when and where you're drafting this guy, because he could be a star and he could be Deshaun Watson's big-time number 1 receiver every single year. But he can't seem to stay healthy. So there's another one, high risk, high reward. If you find him in the 8 to 10 round range, yeah, pick him up. But I wouldn't go any earlier than that simply because of his history with injuries. So it makes it a risky pick, but has the chance to be huge for you. You just got to know you can't be too upset if he heads up on the IR, because that is the type of receiver and career he has had in the NFL. So those are my top tier 6 guys, and those are my 6 tiers for fantasy football wide receivers. Obviously, there's going to be some guys you might think I forgot, but those are the main guys when I look at receivers and I'm looking at the draft board. That's who I'm looking for. But receiving position is such an interesting position because people try and go running back so early that aside from tight ends, towards the end of the draft, a lot of people are trying to pick that receiver who's going to just jump out of the gate and be huge for a team out of nowhere. So receiver is one position that it's different than the others simply because there's such a volume of good receivers, and it has become such a pass-happy league that you're going to be able to get production out of receivers later in the rounds. But there's certain ones that are so worth the higher rounds. So in my draft strategy, I get my running back first, go receiver heavy, maybe get another running back later down the road, and then go quarterback much later. But with all these guys, I try and tell you kind of the draft value I would give them or put them at. The thing is, though, is every single fantasy football draft is different. Every single one. You can't argue that. Different players, different values, different teams. Just it's crazy how different every single time it can get. Whether you have 3 teams, 2 teams, there is not a fantasy football draft aside from like the first 2 rounds that is similar. So it's something to take into consideration as you go into your fantasy football drafts. But I hope I gave you some helpful information as we inch closer to that NFL football season. I've said it earlier, I'm going to say it again. We are under 3 weeks till training camp, so we're really gearing up for the prime of this podcast. So just stick around after the break. We're going to be talking about 2 different things. I'm going to be giving you a little brief tight end tiers, not as deep as I did with these other positions, just because of kind of the position in itself. You know, a lot of teams don't get to tight ends. I've talked about my philosophy with tight ends, which I will get to later, but you're going to hear some tight end tiers, as well as a little brief chat about the crazy Patrick Mahomes contract. So stick around, we'll get to it.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
All right. Welcome back, everybody. I'm very thankful you made it this far into the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast with me. We're going to finish up with some great stuff. I've gone over tiers of all the positions, quarterback, running back, wide receivers. Now I'm going to get a brief little description of the tight end tiers, not as in-depth as the other ones because it's just a different type of position. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about this Patrick Mahomes $500 million contract, which is just insane to me. I'm going to be honest with you. But let's get into the tight end tiers. I'm going to give you a little bit of my philosophy as we get into the tight ends. And my thing, tight end position in fantasy football is much more important than people think. They think they can just get one later on and be fine. But the tight end can be a huge position for you because it is such a red zone target. It is such a touchdown heavy position that it can be really a team changer if you have a reliable one. So I try and get a tight end in the first 6 to 7 rounds, one of those top tight ends, because they can be such a crucial part of your fantasy football team. And I'm going to let you in on a little trick of mine, if possible. Like I said earlier, they all depends on how your draft is going. But if you have the chance to get a 2 tight end system, 2 guys who are the top tight ends on their team, they know how to get touchdowns, I'm telling you right now, you will be in the championship of your fantasy football league. I'm telling you right now, if you can get 2 scoring tight ends on your starting roster, it will be work wonders for you. But obviously, it doesn't work like that every year. So you got to be prepared. You got to know when to get that number 1 tight end, and you got to be ready to roll with the punches and get the number 1 tight end and be able to put other people in your flex. So let's get to tight end tiers. There's 2 guys that set themselves apart. Everyone knows the names. Everyone knows what I'm about to say. It's kind of like the Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson conversation, but for tight ends, and it is George Kittle and Travis Kelce. Let's be honest. These guys are freaks. So good. They play on the two best teams in the league. Quarterbacks both have great relationships and chemistry with these tight ends. They love to target them in the red zone. And to be honest, if you get one of these guys in the first 5 rounds, it's worth it. I know other tight ends, I would not agree with this, but these guys are so good. I mean, you watch George Kittle run when he has the ball, and he's the most athletic guy on that field, and he can take it the distance. He doesn't go down easily, neither does Kelce. So tier number 1, tight ends, top 5 rounds, George Kittle, Travis Kelce. The other two, or the rest of the tight ends, it's a little different story, but those are 2 to keep an eye on for as you progress in the early stages of the fantasy football draft. As you get into the next tier of tight ends, you have the George Kittle and Travis Kelce's of the league, and they're going to go early. I know I said first 5 rounds, but if they're there in the 5th round, I would honestly be surprised. And the next 2 guys near elite, you really can't go wrong with either of them. Tight ends are obvious ones. I'm going Zach Ertz and Mark Andrews. Zach Ertz has just been a force in this league for years, especially on a Eagles team that hasn't had the best receiving core the past couple of years. It is a guy who's just consistent week in and week out. He's going to be putting up solid numbers. He's a good red zone security blanket for Carson Wentz. You can't go wrong there. And Mark Andrews, I've talked about it on this podcast before. He's another big-time performer for the Baltimore Ravens. Lamar Jackson loves finding him near the end zone. And it's just someone that tight ends, these top tight ends in the league, like I've said, they're just so consistent, and they're just that safety security blanket for these quarterbacks. They are always there. They're dependable targets. So those 4 guys are my top 1 and 2 tiers. Zach Ertz and Mark Andrews, just a little below George Kittle and Travis Kelce. But here's the thing with these 4 guys that I have learned in fantasy football drafts. The minute Travis Kelce and George Kittle are off the board, I'm talking the minute the first tight end goes, whether it's Kelce or Kittle, they all go back to back to back. Maybe not back to back to back picks, but you get what I mean. Once one goes, they start dropping like flies because people realize they need to get on the tight end train. So it's something to pay attention for. Now, tier 3, right next to elite, if not elite, just a little below these 4 guys. And now I'm going to go Rob Gronkowski to start off this group. And if he hadn't sat out, he would be in that top group with Travis Kelce and George Kittle, because that's where he was before. But since he sat out a year, he's coming back from retirement, new system, new everything, I'm going to put him in tier 3. But there's a chance within 3 weeks of the season, you're going to be looking at a top 3 tight end in this league. So that's another one. And honestly, it would not surprise me if he is valued in fantasy football drafts right above Mark Andrews and Zach Ertz. If he's not that 3rd guy, I would not be surprised. And beneath that Robert Gronkowski, I am going to go with Darren Waller. Might surprise some people. Las Vegas Raiders tight end. He came out of nowhere last year, kind of a sleeper, and he proved John Gruden loves to run a very generic offense. Pound the ball, get the ball to the tight ends, throw the ball and play action pass. And I think Darren Waller is going to have another huge season. I think it was the first 5 or 6 games. He was one of the top fantasy football performers. But I don't think it's going to be like that throughout the year. But he's going to be someone you can completely rely on every single week. Now, this next guy is someone I am big on. I had him on one of my teams last year, and he was great for me, very consistent, and that's Evan Ingram of the New York Giants. This is someone who I think is just like the other tight ends, a force to be reckoned with on the field, a great red zone target, and another security blanket for Daniel Jones. Young quarterbacks love to look for their tight ends because they run kind of more simple routes, kind of just an out or a curl real quick that they can just get it to them real quick and just rack up those receptions. If you're in a PPR league, tight ends, you want one of these top tight ends because it's going to help you. So Evan Ingram is another name to look out for in this tier 3. And to round this tier 3 third tier out, I'm going to go with Hunter Henry. Something I am kind of skeptical of just because he has been injured before, but when he's healthy, he is a top 6, top 7 tight end in this league, and he can really help your fantasy football team. yes, they have an interesting quarterback situation, but that doesn't bother me too much because I think he is going to be that number 2 guy in that offense behind Keenan Allen. Now, in this fourth tier, these are people who aren't going to be as good as these guys I've been listing, but they are start worthy. They're top tight end on their team, and they're going to be worth a starting spot on your fantasy football team. And that first one I'm going to go with is Austin Hooper. His first year with the Cleveland Browns, they gave him a big contract, and now with news of David Njoku requesting a trade out of Cleveland, even though they wanted a 2 tight end system, it just shows that Hooper is that number 1 guy and going to be a big time connection for Baker Mayfield. That offense has a lot of firepower around Mayfield, and I think Austin Hooper is going to be a perfect fit in Kevin Stefanski's new system. Now, as we continue to move, I'm kind of tied between these next 2, and that's Hayden Hurst and Tyler Higbee. Hayden Hurst, who was on the Ravens, but now is traded to the Falcons, so kind of taking over where Austin Hooper was, taking over that spot. That's been an offense who loves to get the ball to the tight end, so I would expect Hayden Hurst to have a big year and really kind of break out of his shell. He's a number 1 overall draft pick, or first round draft pick, not number 1 overall. First round draft pick for the Ravens a couple years ago, and now is traded to the Falcons, and I think Matt Ryan will love having him as a target. Tyler Higbee is the Los Angeles Rams tight end and a close friend of Jared Goff, so they have a good working relationship. Now, right before I get into tier 5, I'm going to go with Noah Fant of the Denver Broncos. He's someone who started off a little slow, but I think could get there and be a start-worthy person. Now, as we get into the 5th tier of tight ends, these are guys who you don't want to be banking your starting tight end position off them. These are kind of stream-worthy people. After round 10, these are players that, my tight end's on a bye, or I need a flex in this guy for this week. These are players who I would look for in that situation. And my first one is TJ Hawkinson of the Detroit Lions. He's shown flashes. He's yet to be consistent with how good he can be, but he has shown big time flashes that I really think he could be a consistent, great producing tight end, but he's yet to show that. So for now, I'm going to put him in the streaming category of my tight end rankings. Not saying he can't be, but that's the top guy I am going towards for that kind of area. And now the next guy is Mike Gesicki of the Miami Dolphins. He really came on late last season and showed he could be a reliable tight end for the Dolphins. And that offense, I think, is going to continue to improve under Tua Tagovailoa whenever they do put him in. They were solid with Fitzpatrick last year, too, so it's not a ding against him. But Mike Gesicki is a name to look out for. And then the next one is Jared Cook, who is now the tight end for the New Orleans Saints. And like I've said about different quarterbacks, Drew Brees is one who always finds a way to get his tight ends the ball. So that is a reliable guy. He's not as trustworthy as some of these other guys I've been listing, but that is a guy I would trust in a stream-like situation. So there are my kind of top tight ends in this league. And like I've said before, tight end is an interesting position. You want one of those top 5 or 6 guys because they are going to be very, very trustworthy. The other ones, maybe in a flex situation or kind of this guy's on a bye, I need him in the tight end position. But those top 6 to 7 guys are who you want. And if you can somehow look out and get 2 of those, a flex position and a regular tight end spot, you are going to be in good shape. That is my secret to fantasy football. If you luck out and are able to get 2 very touchdown tight ends, that's a big one. So those are my tight ends. Now, I hope you enjoyed my tiers of all the fantasy football positions, kind of going through the top players. It's big to know and big to be aware of as you go into this fantasy football season. But now we're going to kind of veer away from that and talk about the hottest news in the NFL this week, and that is Super Bowl champ, MVP, Patrick Mahomes signing a 10-year extension through 2031. I mean, no one has ever seen anything like it. It's a deal that's worth up to $450 million and has the potential to be a $503 million deal. I mean, come on. Where do you even start with that? It is $140 million guaranteed with a no trade clause. And I don't blame the Chiefs at all. Patrick Mahomes is a generational talent, potentially could be one of the best to ever do it. You can see that every time he steps on the field, how good this guy is. But I have an issue with this. I do have one issue. And obviously it depends on how this contract is structured. Is it early heavy? Is it kind of pushed in the back? Do they have payments going out for years and years and years? But my thing is, how do you continue to sign free agents with that amount of money allotted to one guy? He's taking up probably at least 10 to 15% of their cap space. That's one player on a 50-person roster. So that part of it makes me scratch my head a little bit. But I will say I understand it. Patrick Mahomes is the face of your franchise, arguably the face of the NFL, and he is the guy who's going to continue to lead you to this promised land especially after coming off a Super Bowl win. I mean, his value has never been so high. So I can't blame the Chiefs for this signing, especially because if they didn't do it, someone was going to do it. That's a matter of fact. That's not a question. It is 100%. So I can't argue with it, but I question it at times. And it's going to be interesting to see what this signing does to the QB market. You know, big thing this offseason was, when is Dak Prescott going to get a contract? When's Dak Prescott going to get a contract? And the Cowboys have been holding out, not wanting to give him money. And he obviously is nowhere near Patrick Mahomes worthy. But now he sees this big of a contract. Dak is going to want his payday. And it honestly, I hate to say it, Cowboy fans, but part of me is starting to make it think it looks more and more likely like Dak Prescott will not be the quarterback there. I mean, they're in a kind of a transition change with Mike McCarthy, but it's going to be interesting. Jerry Jones, what is he going to do when it comes time to put his money where his mouth is? Is he going to pay Dak Prescott, or is he going to let him walk and try and do another free agent, or draft a guy, let Mike McCarthy pick a guy? So there's a lot of moving variables. And now you look at Patrick Mahomes' contract, and you have Lamar Jackson, the next up-and-coming superstar. What type of money is he going to get? I mean, if he gets to the playoffs and he performs as he has in the regular season and carries that Baltimore Ravens team, he's going to be right there up there with Patrick Mahomes. There's no question about it. But if he doesn't in the playoffs and doesn't get to what he has been doing, it's going to be a little different. So it's an interesting time to be monitoring this quarterback market in the NFL. And these contracts are getting so insane. So something to kind of just keep an eye out for. It's just straight entertainment, how much money these guys are getting. It's absurd. So it's just Patrick Mahomes' deal blew anything out of the water that NFL fans have seen. And it's pretty much, it's fun to talk about. I mean, $500 million. What do you even do with that? He is a wealthy man, and he earned it. He deserves it. I mean, he's a Super Bowl champ, MVP at the age of 24, 25. He's got a lot of football ahead of him. I saw a stat after this contract, he's going to be 34. That is still prime football age, especially quarterback. Maybe not football age because it's such a physical sport, but quarterback. I mean, just look at Ben Roethlisberger, Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers. They're playing into their late 30s. So he's going to come out of this contract and probably have a solid 5 to 6 more years left in his tank. So just an interesting time to be a quarterback in this league. So guys, that is going to do it for today's show. I hope not only I gave you some things to think about as you move forward into your fantasy football drafts, because they are right around the corner. I hope you had some fun listening to my little rant right there about this Patrick Mahomes contract and signing and what it's going to do for the QB market, because boy, is that forever changed. Come on. So I just want to say thank you so much for listening to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, brought to you by the one and only GSMC Podcast Network. If you have the chance, I'd like to ask you, please remember to subscribe to the show. Write a nice review that really helps us out here at the GSMC Podcast Network. It would be greatly appreciated. And if you have the time, also please go follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Really help us grow those social media outlets. Alrighty, that is it for the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. I am Grady. Thank you very much and have a wonderful rest of your day or night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.